Hello, my name is John, and today we'll be reading The Democrats' Second Secession and America's New Civil War. How to Look at the Bizarre Turn Our Political Life Has Taken by David Horowitz on Frontpagemag, posted May 26, 2017. David Horowitz is the author of Big Agenda, President Trump's Plan to Save America, now on its 10th week on the New York Times bestseller list. Senator Kamala Harris is a rising star in the Democratic Party, frequently mentioned on the short list of contenders for the next presidential race. In a recent commencement speech at Howard University, Harris issued a call to arms, urging her audience to rally behind the Democrats' resistance to the Trump administration. Graduates, indeed we have a fight ahead. This is a fight to define what kind of country we are, and it's a fight to determine what country we will be, she said. Ignore for a moment the impropriety of addressing a class of students as though they were Democratic Party operatives. Focus instead on the statement itself. The call to define what kind of country we are is an ominous agenda for America. Compared to other nations, America is absolutely unique in one regard. It is a country defined in its creation. Normally, nations have been formed on the basis of common origins, ethnicities, and languages, a modern form of tribalism. In contrast, America was created by peoples of diverse origins and ethnicities and on principles that were universal. The American Union was forged in a set of founding documents that insisted on the equality of citizens, regardless of origins. The idea that creates the identity American is summarized in America's official motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. It took a civil war and 200 years of sacrifice and struggle to achieve a polity that approached this ideal. If one political faction is now able to refine the ideal to conform to its own sectarian beliefs, the country we have known will cease to exist. But that is just what the current creed of the Democratic Party, identity politics, entails, and is why the current divisions in our political life seem so intractable. Identity politics is, in fact, the antithesis of American idea. It is a reversion to tribal loyalties. It regards diverse origins, colors, ethnicities, genders, and classes as primary, and proposes a hierarchy of privilege based on them, which it justifies as a reversal of past oppressions. It is not proper role of an opposition party in a democracy to mount a resistance to a duly elected government and press for its overthrow at the very outset of its tenure. But that is precisely what the Democrats have done in the first months of the Trump administration. For the second time in its history, the Democratic Party has opted to secede from the Union and its social contract. This time there is not going to be an actual civil war because the federal government is now so powerful that whoever controls it will decide the outcome. The passions of an irreconcilable conflict are still present, but they are channeled into a political confrontation over the executive power. In launching their resistance, Democrats rejected the honeymoon normally offered to incoming presidents. Until now, this tradition has functioned as something of a sacred political right. Campaigns are by their nature divisive, and they inevitably exaggerate the differences between factions of the electorate. The presidential honeymoon is designed to reunite the contending factions as constituents of a shared constitutional republic. It allows an incoming president to take his place as the chief executive of all the people, to have his cabinet reconfirmed, and to launch his agendas before the normal contentions of a democracy resume. It ratifies the peaceful transition of power and reasserts the principle that as Americans we are one. According to the Gallup organization, the normal duration of a presidential honeymoon in recent times has been 7 months. The Democrats didn't give Trump 7 seconds. While he was president-elect, they were already attacking him as a racist, a white nationalist, anti-immigrant, and anti-Muslim, also an anti-democratic fascist, a would-be dictator. His election was called illegitimate, the alleged agent of a Russian conspiracy. This Mamie quickly metastasized into one of the most bizarre witch hunts in our political history, a Red Scare without actual Reds, in which Democrat after Democrat stepped forward to allege that Trump had colluded with Vladimir Putin to steal the election. Trump did not get confirmation hearings for the team he was hoping to put in place. He got a witch hunt instead, a series of attempted character assassinations directed at his nominees. Most outrageously, his candidate for Attorney General, Senator Jeff Sessions, was smeared as a racist by one Democrat senator after another, beginning with Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Yet Sessions' public career reflected values that were quite the opposite, included service as the Attorney General of a deep South state, in which capacity he had prosecuted the Ku Klux Klan and desegregated the public schools. These acts reflected his actual commitment to civil rights. Schumer and his colleagues had served along Sessions for 10 and 20 years and knew very well that their accusations were defamatory and false, but they persisted in them anyway. So that no one would mistake their hostile intent, the Democrats' attacks were accompanied by calls for Trump's impeachment, despite the fact that he had hardly been in office. These were echoed in massive street demonstrations organized and funded by core Democratic groups, which featured chants of "Not my president," claims by celebrity speakers that Trump's election was worse than being raped, and addled wishes to blow up the White House. Each protest, no matter its official organizing premise, was orchestrated to underscore the identity-driven accusations that the Trump regime was anti-woman, anti-black, anti-Muslim, and anti-immigrant. Trump and his supporters were in turn anathemized as members of a hostile tribe, white nationalists. Behind this democratic rage is a conviction that the Trump administration represents a reactionary throwback to the status quo ante before Obama began fundamentally transforming the United States of America, as he promised on the eve of his election. The new order towards which progressives think they are marching is called social justice. To Democrats, a hierarchy of privileges they offer groups on the basis of ethnicity, skin color, and gender is social justice. It defines a society they intend to create, which in their eyes is mortally threatened by the Trump regime and its conservative supporters. During the second presidential debate, there was a seminal moment illuminating this conflict. It occurred when Trump turned to the 50 million viewers in the television audience and said, "You have to understand, Hillary has tremendous hatred in her heart." He was referring to Clinton's campaign remark that her opponents belonged in a basket of deplorables, irredeemables, whom she went on to name racists, sexists, homophobes, Islamophobes, xenophobes. Trump, she said, had raised them up, and that made him unfit to be America's president. The condemnation of her political opponents is not unique to Clinton, but is shared by Democrats generally. There is hardly a conservative in the country who has been in an argument with a so-called liberal who has not also been called racist, sexist, homophobe, etc., terms designed to drum them out of decent society. They are expressions of the hatred progressives feel towards anyone who opposes their crusade to redefine America's identity in the interests of social justice. The theory behind identity politics is an ideology the political left refers to as cultural Marxism. This is a perspective that takes Marx's view that society is divided into warring classes and extends it to encompass races, genders, and ethnicities. It is a vision that regards one group's success as another group's oppression. Social justice, the proposed remedy for inequality and division, punishes oppressor groups by redistributing their incomes and privileges to the underrepresented, marginalized, and otherwise oppressed. It is a vision that disregards accountability of individuals and ascribes to group identities the inequalities that are allegedly unjust. The left has created a term of art, people of color, to promote its collectivist views on ethnicity and race. People of color is not grammatical English. We do not refer to crayons of color or televisions of color. It is a French construction reflecting the way French people speak. People of color is an invention of ideologues to serve an ideological purpose, which is to organize the world into categories of cultural Marxism, into oppressors and oppressed. To understand its usage, one has only to look to Mexico, a country whose illegal migrants have been one of the flashpoints of the war against the Trump administration, as Democrats have rallied to their defense. Mexico is comprised of two main ethnic groups: the descendants of the Spanish conquistadors who enslaved and slaughtered the indigenous Indians, and the descendants of the Indians. In other words, actual oppressors and actual oppressed. When members of these two groups cross in the United States, however, they both become people of color, therefore oppressed, therefore deserving of special sensitivities, special allowances, special privileges, all without regard to their individual histories and merits. That is why criminal migrants from Mexico who are here illegally can commit felonies against Americans, including rape and murder, and become a cause for progressives and Democrats, who create sanctuary cities and policies to protect them, because they are people of a color and allegedly oppressed. Maharajas in India are also people of color. Islamic beheaders and crucifiers in Syria are people of color too. The whole world is people of a color except white people, the designated oppressors. Identity politics is both racist and totalitarian. It obliterates the individual in favor of the group. It removes the agency of individuals as subjects and turns them into objects. After this is understood, there is no longer any mystery as to why advocates of identity politics should come into existential collision with the American framework and its defenders, personified by President Trump. In 2016, platform of the Democratic Party vows a societal transformation that will end institutional and systematic racism in our society. This is the ideology of cultural Marxism. Institutional racism as a systemic American problem is a political fiction. Americans outlined institutional racism half a century ago with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1965. Any incidence of institutional racism today is actionable in the courts, the ultra-liberal courts that threw out Trump's executive orders on extra-legal grounds because of off-the-cuff remarks he made on the campaign trail. Systemic racism and institutional racism are anti-American mythologies that drive the Democratic Party's political agendas. The Democratic platform and Democrats generally regard every social disparity as prima facie evidence of racial or gender oppression, and attribute such disparities not to individual decisions and performances but to unnamed policies, which if they actually existed would be illegal. Consider the following plank in the 2016 Democratic Party platform, titled Closing the Racial Wealth Gap. America's economic inequality problem is even more pronounced when it comes to racial and ethnic disparities in wealth and income. Democrats say it is unacceptable that the median wealth for African Americans and Latino Americans is roughly 1/10 that of white Americans. These disparities are also stark for American Indians and certain Asian American subgroups, and may become even more significant when considering other characteristics such as age, disability, status, sexual orientation, or gender identity. The platform then explains, though racial and income gaps are the result of policies that discriminate against people of color and constrain their ability to earn income and build assets to the same extent as other Americans. But if such policies existed, they would be illegal under the Civil Rights Acts. The disparities, on the other hand, are realistically explained by individual details. For example, the presence or lack of two-parent families, the degree of education, or whether, in the case of Latino Americans, English is spoken in the home. More generally, the ability to accumulate wealth is determined in large part by genes and by cultural attitudes that guide the choice families and individuals make. Otherwise, Japanese Americans, who are people of color, would not be among America's richest and therefore most privileged economic groups. So as this chart shows, single-parent family-headed families account for 37% of the poor people in America, whereas married two-parent families are less than 7%. The same mythology characterizes the Democrats' claims about gender disparities. The Clinton campaign presented itself as a quest for equality for women. According to candidate Clinton, women across America were being paid only 76 on the dollar for the same skills, job experience, and work as men. But if this were so, it would also be illegal under Equal Pay for Equal Work Act passed as long ago as 1963 by a Congress dominated by men. After the election, the New York Times published a column inspired by studies that ratified what conservatives have been saying for a generation, namely, the gender pay gap is largely because of motherhood. The disparity exists because child-rearing takes women out of the workforce for extended periods and also causes them to seek flex-time occupations that pay less. Similarly, the animus behind Democratic assaults on Republicans and their support for law and order as racist is the direct consequence of viewing all social disparities through the distorted lens of oppression politics. Thus, the overrepresentation of African Americans in the prison system is not because of systemic racism. Police forces have been integrated for decades along with the entire criminal justice system. African Americans are overrepresented in the prison population because they are overrepresented in the commission of actual crimes. Democrats embrace the Black Lives Matter movement and its effort to cast career criminals as civil rights victims and law enforcement officials, that is, policemen, as villains in an inevitable consequence of ignoring the specific circumstances of the incidents under review and forcing them into the melodramatic framework of racism and oppression. The social justice future to which these attitudes lead can be seen on college campuses, the experimental laboratories of the left, which are now characterized by privileged admissions and tuition scholarships distributed on a racial basis, safe spaces for people of color only, and at Harvard, segregated graduations for blacks. Trump and his followers not only understood the fateful nature of the conflict triggered by decades of these assaults, their campaign to make America great again is inspired by them. In his inaugural address, Trump opposed to the progressive vision and its divisive consequences the American idea, e pluribus unum, referring to those Americans who had been economically left behind. Trump said, "We are one nation and their pain is our pain. Their dreams are our dreams and their success will be our success. We share one heart, one home, and one glorious destiny." The oath of office that I take today is an oath of allegiance to all Americans. Trump then elaborated on the idea that Americans are united as equal citizens. Through our loyalty to our country, we will rediscover our loyalty to each other. When you open your heart to patriotism, there is no room for prejudice. And finally, it is time to remember that old wisdom our soldiers will never forget, that whether we are black or brown or white, we all bleed the same red blood of patriots. We all enjoy the same glorious freedoms, and we all salute the same great American flag. And whether a child is born in the urban sprawl of Detroit or the windswept plains of Nebraska, they look up at the same night sky. They fill their heart with the same dreams, and they are infused with the breath of life by the same Almighty Creator. In spirit, this echoed the address by the last man to have war declared on his presidency by an opposition party, even as he entered office. In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war, Lincoln said in his first inaugural. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one to preserve, protect, and defend it. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. This video is a production of the School of the White Crane. My name is John Brooker, and you could reach me through commentary on this video and also through my Gmail listed here. Please share this video with your friends and family and on social media. May God richly bless you.